Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. It's time to hear from the top Christian litigators in the nation who have come forward to tell us the truth and help us defend our faith.
Hear ye, hear ye. All rise. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano, is in session.
And welcome once again to Faith on Trial. I'm Deacon Mike Mano, your host, with Gina Noel in our network studios in West Des Moines. Gina, how are you today?
I am well. Looking forward to the beginning of Advent this weekend.
That's right.
I thought it was last weekend. Went to church all ready for it. I should have looked at a calendar.
Usually it comes right after Thanksgiving, but the calendar.
So does that mean it's
different.
late this year?
Well, it's not late because Christmas is a defined dated holiday, 25th.
It feels late, but okay.
It was Thanksgiving that was, I guess,
early, maybe?
Early, yeah.
Okay.
That's the way I would look at it.
Okay.
Anyway. All right.
So a happy beginning of Advent.
Yes.
As the show broadcast will be right on the heels of it.
Right. Last day in ordinary time, and then the next day we're in Advent already.
That's right.
Yeah. So the weekend, yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. My favorite time of the year. And we even got a little snow this week, so I am happy camper.
Well, you're happier than Luann was.
Yeah, you're right. Your wife,
She doesn't particularly care for the snow. She doesn't like bundling up in the car, putting on heavy coats and all that.
My daughter was home from Florida, and she said, I can't wait to get back. She goes, I hate going from 20 degrees outside and then into this hot, air in the car. And
yeah.
I said, well, the same thing happens in Florida with the air conditioning. I don't know what you're talking about. It's hot outside of the car and freezing inside.
One thing I like is the change of seasons. I enjoy the change of seasons. I do too. I couldn't take summer all year round, couldn't take winter all year round, or spring or fall for that matter.
Deacon Mike, the bugs are dead. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
The air is crisp. You get kind of in a survival mode, so you're not as carefree or laid back. It's my favorite time of the year.
Okay,
and I'm glad it's finally snowed.
Yeah, well, we've had our snow. I remember a couple of years ago though, where there was snow, big heavy snowstorm before Thanksgiving, because where we live, our driveway tends to drift, and I remember it was drifted up to my shoulders, and this was before Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen much anymore.
That does not. All right.
Well, we have a show this week.
Yes, we do. Jonathan Butcher, who is a senior fellow in education at the Heritage Foundation, is going to talk to us about what is going on with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it is apparently in some quarters anyway, starting to lose interest in it.
I think the public is finally getting a little tired of some of the extreme features of that particular philosophy or ideology.
Yeah.
In essence, it sounds good. Again, it's that whole argument that the language we use is not necessarily
what we mean,
descriptive of what we actually are intending.
Yeah, and we have to remember, equity is not equality.
That's right.
It's different.
Well,
different.
Bishop Barron says, in the Catholic Church, we believe in DES, dignity, equality, and subsidiarity.
Yeah.
And I'm all in on that one.
That's right. And then we have Jacob Reed, who is a legal counsel with the Center for Christian Ministries with the Alliance Defending Freedom. And there's a very disturbing case in Vermont right now about a private school, religious school, that is being shut out of a tuition program that the state has because of its teachings or its beliefs in the sexual identity of men and women. And then it's also kicked the sports team out of the local leagues that they can play in.
That's right. And their funding was taken away by the state's school choice or however their program works. So, which is very odd because I remember, haven't we had a number of cases that...
We had one from Maine, very similar, went up to the Supreme Court.
That's right. It was the Supreme Court
case. Rang the bell on that one, and apparently Vermont didn't hear that ringing.
So it'll be interesting.
They're doing the same thing, yeah.
It'll be good to get an update from Jacob.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. All right, do you have a prayer to open us up with?
I do. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. God of peace, bring your peace to our violent world, peace in the hearts of all men and women, and peace among the nations of this earth. Turn to your way of love, those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred. Strengthen us all in hope, and give us the wisdom and courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among the nations and in the hearts of all. Amen.
Amen, and especially peace in Israel right now.
Amen.
All right, we will be back right after these messages with Jonathan Butcher from the Heritage Foundation. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And we're back. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, and we have with us right now Jonathan Butcher, who is a senior research fellow in education for the Heritage Foundation. And Jonathan, welcome to the program. I don't think we've had you on before, but we will treat you kindly. First-time guest, we always try and treat kindly.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
So you come back that way. You wrote about DEI and how DEI is starting to lose its way. The house of cards, I think, is falling, is how you characterized it. Why don't you start with that predicate, and let's go and take a look at what is going on with DEI, not only in academia, but in the rest of the world as well.
Well, as we understand the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, we expect a diversity of thought and ideas, as well as a diversity of ethnicities and race. We expect equality under the law, or at least fair treatment of individuals under the law, would not treat people differently with respect to their immutable characteristics. And then with inclusion, we expect that people would be not excluded because of, again, their immutable characteristics. However, DEI does none of those things. DEI emphasizes identity politics and your adherence to a particular group based on your skin color or your country of origin or your ethnicity. It doesn't advocate for equality. It actually advocates that you should receive additional benefits based on what is either perceived or actual disadvantages, sometimes related to ethnicity. And then inclusion has resulted in actually excluding people, because if you are someone who is, say, of Judeo-Christian faith, or who is in the majority, right, in terms of skin color, then you are excluded from these additional benefits. So DEI may have been at one point an attempt to carry out the intentions of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, but it has resulted really in the application of critical race theory and critical ideas. And I'm not talking about sort of deep thinking here. I'm talking about power structures and a focus on disenfranchisement and, frankly, Marxism.
I was just going to use the word Marxism. That's basically what this is. Yes.
Sure. I try not to lead with that, because people will immediately say, "Oh, there's just another conservative saying that everything that they don't agree with is Marxist." But that's not true. I mean, if you look at what DEI offices or DEI departments are saying they want to accomplish, or if you look at their actions, you realize that it really is about consolidating power, right? It's about zero-sum games of who has power over another. And that's what DEI offices are. They are the political operatives of the critical race theory movement.
It also seems to divide people into different tribes, pitting one tribe against another.
Absolutely, and that's a part of the critical worldview, right? I mean, I think people are divided by, under Marxism, of course, it was class, right? But the Frankfurt School and the critical theorists of the 1920s and 1930s wanted to apply Marxism to culture. And so then they began dividing people along the lines of, race and ethnicity, and that's what DEI, also does.
Now, it's been pretty prevalent in colleges and universities around the country for the last few years. How did that come about?
Well, if I had to, give kind of a soft hypothesis, it would be that after Prop 209 in California in the 1990s, that was a proposition in California that said that universities and any public employers would not use racial preferences in hiring or in college admissions. I believe that radical activists became particularly concerned about, advocating for racial preferences. And while DEI offices did exist, usually with other names, prior to Prop 209, I think it accelerated, after that proposition passed. And I think it they became even more embedded in the college culture. And I think they did it under the auspices of saying, look, if you don't have a DEI department, why then, who's going to protect against racial discrimination on campus, right? And, of course, the answer is that, the U.S. Department of Justice does so, as well as, state attorneys general and others.
Yeah. All right, so we've got DEI, or the starting of DEI back to California's proposition there. But that doesn't explain then how it went every place other than California, because we see it all over. Were these just copycats, people saying, hey, this is a good idea, or this is a way to prevent us from having the same type of referendum?
Yeah, so again, I think some of these existed even before Prop 209, but I think the emphasis on and the outward commitment to racial preferences became even more pronounced among these departments. And, as the critical race theory movement began to gain momentum, because remember, critical race theory only dates back to, maybe the late 1980s, early 1990s. Critical legal theory was its predecessor, but, that only goes back to the 1970s. So, we're really kind of talking about something that began to gain steam in the 1990s into the 2000s, sort of picking up during the Obama administration, because, left of center politicians and lawmakers, were trying to advance this worldview. I think it did spread on purpose. I think it was part and parcel of a movement to limit or eradicate colorblind thinking and meritocracy. And that is those are long-standing goals of critical theory in general, but critical race theory in particular.
Right.
And how much of it has to do with the economic impact on this particular philosophy? You notice quite a bit of financial resources for students who fit into different labels, or programs that emphasize improvements in metrics for different racial classes or labels. Is it a chicken and an egg that the economic, the ideology started and the economic followed, or did the economic begin this process and the ideology follow?
Well, I think that there has been a correct view after Brown versus Board of Education that we needed to provide access to children who are black, who are Hispanic, to the same sorts of options that their white peers may have had, right? I think that's sort of the thinking underlying all of this, and it became from let's just desegregate to let's actually provide additional advantages or benefits to students so that we can sort of demonstrate that America is a welcoming, diverse society. And that began through the critical race theory movement to sort of manipulate the feelings of guilt that I think Americans carried over, appropriately from, the institution of slavery and the Jim Crow era. Those are all things that no American should be proud of, right? And we should all be committed to saying, we never want to return to that. However, when you manipulate those feelings that America was not living up to its principles, and you say the only way to make amends for this is to effectively switch the disadvantage so that now people who had advantage before are now second-class citizens, and the people who were marginalized before now have first-class citizenship. That's what's going on, right? And that's why you have additional scholarships, additional money for, various programs for individuals of minority ethnicity and things like that. I mean, look, there is no question that America failed to live up to its original principles, or some Americans did, and certainly in government policy through, the things that I've listed there. However, it's now being manipulated, right? And we're getting to the point where there's calls for reparations, which are, it's a highly confusing, not to mention contentious solution that I'm not even sure we can call it a solution, right? Because how could you put a monetary figure on the suffering and loss that individuals who are Black Americans
I want to know how much they're going to give Oprah.
Well, and to suggest that reparations, would somehow, do we do this every generation? How long do we do this for? I think the better solution, the better answer, and I think the conversation we should be having is, where are there still obstacles to success for individuals who are of a minority ethnicity? And I would strongly argue that district assignment, zip code assignment to public schools is one. I think that a school system that assigns children to schools based on where they live is an obstacle to the success of children, and you can see that through, the public schools in Chicago and L.A. and Philadelphia and New York City and Miami, right, that have failed to help students succeed for generations. And so
growing trend.
There's a growing enrollment in private schools now, Catholic schools, parochial schools, charter schools.
Yes.
Yeah, there absolutely is, and I think that is sort of the future of the education landscape in the United States. It's been very exciting to see state lawmakers not just create new private learning options, but to make those eligible to every child in a state. We saw this in Iowa, Oklahoma, Utah, North Carolina, Ohio,
Florida.
Just to name a few. Florida just did it recently. Arizona did it 2 years ago. West Virginia did it a few years ago. This is a really remarkable change here, and we're still facing teacher unions who try to interfere with these options. There's a lawsuit in South Carolina right now that has the backing of the local, teacher union representatives in that state. So we will still see obstacles or objections from the entrenched interest groups, but yeah, this is an exciting change. Now, to be fair, we have to be honest about what the sort of numbers we're looking at. There are 50 million kids who are school-aged in the U.S., thereabouts, right? About, we've got 10 million kids in private schools, thereabouts. We've got 49 million in traditional public schools. The homeschool population is, still growing. I think it's a fair estimate to say about 5 million. So we're still looking at, upwards of 40-plus million kids who are in assigned who are in public schools that we want to make sure have the option to go somewhere else if that school's failing them. So we have work to do, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Agreed.
All right. Now, how did this get spread into the corporate setting? We see this now. It seems like every major corporation has a DEI office. We've got even in our bar association here, they're looking at DEI officers and assisting DEI officers in different law firms. How did this jump from the academy to the corporate world?
One of the things that I write about in my book, Splintered Critical Race Theory and the Progressive War on Truth, is that the DEI sector is an $8 billion a year industry, and that's a pretty sizable number on the corporate side. I think its diversity training programs have long been a part of the corporate world. I would say that now we are increasingly reading that on earnings calls that businesses are hosting these days, they are less and less likely to bring up DEI on these calls. I think more and more businesses are starting to fear, and appropriately so, that DEI programs may violate civil rights and the Constitution. That's what the Students for Fair Admission Supreme Court case a couple of months ago, heavily hinted at. That these DEI functions that advance racial preferences, may in fact violate federal law. So I think corporations are starting to back away from this. But it's a huge industry. Interesting that you bring up the American Bar Association, because they've actually been at the center of some hearings by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights over the last 20 years. They actually tried to change their operating policies to sort of integrate racial preferences into their accreditation processes. So the ABA is actually right there at the middle of this advancing racial preferences effort here. So I think we should be keeping a keen eye on what the Bar Association is trying to do.
Yeah. How much has this affected what we now call as cancel culture?
I think it is a result of critical thinking. I mean, when you have critical theory advancing the idea that some people deserve more rights than others, and I'm not making that up. I mean, that's
exactly what they're saying. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's Herbert Marcuse's words from, he was a critical theorist in the 60s, happened to be the mentor to Angela Davis, who, of course,
Columbia University, wasn't he?
I know that most of the Frankfurt
School went there.
Landed at Columbia. I'm not sure where Marcuse was. He may have gone to Berkeley, but I'm not certain. Okay. But regardless, Angela Davis was one of his students. She, of course, was ran for the Communist Party nomination for president, among other things, involved in a bombing and of a murder of a judge, things like that. So Marcuse was one that said more people deserve rights. Some people deserve more rights than others, and the result of that is when you say or do something that doesn't conform to the prevailing orthodoxy around the power structures, then you are canceled. And speech is no longer a freedom. It's no longer a right. Like, you don't have a right to speak or to your ideas. You cannot say things that would offend someone else's feelings of being a part of an identity group. And then it becomes that's how, if you've heard the phrase words are violence, that's where that kind of comes from, right? If you say something that doesn't conform, then you're being violent. And then you get canceled, right? You are no longer allowed to participate in society, which is, again, this is one of the things that conflicts with the whole equity, right, idea.
One of the things you mentioned in the article that I have in front of me that you just published a couple of weeks ago was involving college campuses, where they now have these bias response teams that become investigator, judge, and jury when somebody's accused of something. Want to explain what's going on there with those?
Yeah, what an Orwellian name, a bias response team. Yeah. One of the bias response teams claims that the only way you know it's bias is by your own feelings. So someone their own feelings can feel like they heard or read something that they think was biased. They can report that, usually anonymously, to this bias response team made up of, by the way, often DEI staff or part of the DEI office. And then there'll be an investigation into the person that said or did, or the poster or the group that did this thing, and it can result in consequences. And that obviously will make it so students self-censor. They don't want to talk, right, if they're afraid that what they say is going to come back to haunt them. Fortunately, there are terrific advocacy groups out there, Speech First being one, who are representing students and fighting against these bias response teams. In places like the University of Michigan, for example, they actually won, and Michigan agreed to close its bias response team. They've had victories in a couple of other high-profile universities.
You pointed that out, that one of the things that's folding this house of cards on DEI is a response by judges.
Yeah, and the some of the rulings against these bias response teams, I mean, they've said they chill speech They said they are, clearly limiting the amount of expression that can happen on campuses, and that's been really strong. It's been good to see that from the litigation, from the judicial branch, because we don't always get that same pushback, right, from the executive branch, depending on who's in power. So it's good that we've seen the court system call these bias response teams what they are, and that's censorship.
And state legislators are starting to look at this. Gina, you had the Iowa Board of Regents.
Right, the Iowa State Board of Regents did an extensive review of the state universities and found some disturbing things in their very long report, but in their conclusions, there were 10 points, I think, 10 or 12 points. And most all of them centered around eliminating any of these DEI operations on campus and positions on campus unless there's some sort of financial accreditation requirements. Yeah. Jonathan, how about public support? Do you see, anecdotally, I see a lot of people being fed up with this. They might have put a Black Lives Matter sign in their front yard when that movement began, and now their eyes have been made wide open, if nothing else, to see that the manipulation of this DEI philosophy.
I think it's going to be a constant process of reminding people of the problems caused by DEI programs. I think that it's going to be a long process of educating people about how these programs are an affront to civil rights. I think people who have undergone DEI trainings, surveys have found that they are they do not get high marks, the DEI training programs. In fact, DEI training finds that people either don't change their opinions or become more tolerant, or they actually become resentful of having to have undergone this training. But it will take some time, I think, for people to understand that we are not, those who oppose DEI, we're not opposed to civil rights. We're actually trying to protect civil rights.
Exactly. And
we need to make the point here that DEI does not advance civil rights.
We are pretty much running out of time here. Unfortunately, Jonathan, we could continue this conversation for quite some time, I think. But there's two things I want you to tell us about again. One, you mentioned your book. What was the name of the book again?
Yes, it's called Splintered, Critical Race Theory and the Progressive War on Truth. And
where can people find that?
You can get it at most booksellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and others.
Very good. And the second thing we need to know is you are with the Heritage Foundation. So how do we find you at the Heritage Foundation and follow your writings and things like that?
Yeah, thank you. At heritage.org, all of our research is available there, and then you can follow me on social media at JM_Butcher.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. It was certainly an informative conversation, and we recommend your book now. Hopefully you get a few more sales out of the interview, but especially following what you're writing on the Heritage Foundation, we find that website to be very helpful.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. And Gina and I will be right back after these messages. And we're back. We have Jacob Reed, who is a legal counsel for the Center for Christian Ministries at Alliance Defending Freedom, with us to talk about a very disturbing case out of Vermont. Jake, welcome to our program. I don't think we've had you on before. And anytime we have a first-time guest, we always try and be very nice to you so that you come back. We don't want the word to get out that we're bad to guests. So.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Welcome.
You're certainly welcome. Let's talk about this problem with Vermont.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, ADF, represent a Christian school in Vermont, Mid-Vermont Christian School. And that school's been around for, almost 30 years. Actually, I think over 30 years, doing what it does, teaching kids in line with the gospel and seeking to advance the gospel and that sort of thing. What happened here is it's kind of twofold. So the state of Vermont has a town tuitioning program which basically says that if you live in a rural part of the state within a school district that does not operate a public high school, then that school district's responsibility then is to pay tuition for those students to attend either another public school or a private school of that student's choice or that family's choice. So here there's a family that attends Mid-Vermont Christian School who lives in an area that does not have a public high school, so they wanted to take advantage of the town tuitioning program and have that school district pay funds at Mid-Vermont Christian so that those students could attend school there. However, the state has essentially forbid Mid-Vermont Christian from participating in that program because of its religious beliefs and practices and how it operates at school. So that's problem one. Problem two is similar but a little bit different, and it has to do with school athletics. So Mid-Vermont Christian School has school athletics and has participated for almost 30 years in the state's sponsored league, which is the Vermont Principals Association. However, this past February, their girls' basketball team was set to play against a team within the girls' basketball tournament, and that other team had a biological male on the team. And because of the school's religious beliefs about sex and gender and, the fact that God creates male and female and there's unique differences between the two, it declined respectfully to forcing its girls to have to play that biological male. And in response, it was booted from the association and now can no longer participate in any athletics or activities within the state. So
in other words, if your religious beliefs don't comply with the state's idea of what they should be, you're just out in your ear.
That's right. Vermont has essentially, adopted their own beliefs about gender and sex, and they are forcing private religious schools, such as Mid-Vermont Christian, to adopt that same belief if you want to participate in town tuitioning and receive public funds, and if you want to participate in high school and middle school athletics, which is, quite absurd that the state is saying, agree with us, or you're essentially blacklisted from both public funds and high school athletics.
Now, this is not just happening in Vermont. We see it, I think, throughout the nation, and maybe you can bring us up to date with some of the other problems that you've seen around the country and where they're coming from, or are they isolated in a particular geographic area, or they just anywhere? Absolutely.
So let's cut it in two here. Let's talk about the tuition angle, the public funds first. This is not the first time around for Vermont. Vermont is continuing to discriminate against Christian schools. What Vermont had done in the past was, within the same town tuitioning program, said that religious schools could not participate, full stop. That was the end of it, because they were religious. ADF actually filed a couple of lawsuits a few years ago that actually resulted in good results, where the Second Circuit Court of Appeals said that Vermont's policy of discriminating against religious schools by prohibiting them from participating in the program, that was unconstitutional. So Vermont has already been scolded, if you will, by the federal courts. Yet now, instead of just telling religious schools they can't participate off the bat, they say, religious schools, you can quote-unquote participate, but you have to adopt these certain policies and change your internal practices if you want to. And that's something that Mid-Vermont Christian is not willing to do. And we've also seen this in Maine. Maine has a similar program where public schools don't operate a high school. The state is supposed to pay tuition for those students to attend private schools.
Right, and that went to the Supreme Court, didn't it?
That's right. So this decision came out just last year. It was Carson v. Macon. The Supreme Court said, so let me back up a little bit. Maine did the same thing, saying if you're a religious school, we're not going to pay you tuition money because you're religious and you want to teach your students religious things. The Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. Religious schools obviously teach their students religious things, or else what's the point in being religious? And so by depriving religious schools from participating in the tuition program, that violated the schools and the parents who went there, their their free exercise rights under the First Amendment. So this is not anything new. We've seen it. In fact, the Supreme Court 3 times over the last 6 years has issued decisions that said when the state operates a public benefit program, whether it be playground grants, as was the case in the Trinity Lutheran case, or whether it's tax credits for school scholarships, as was the case in Montana, that's the Espinoza case, or Carson v. Macon, as I just mentioned. The Supreme Court said when the state operates a public benefits program, it has to allow religious schools and entities participate. It can't exclude them because they're religious or because they do religious things. So nothing new here, and that's what's happening in Vermont.
Why don't the people in Vermont understand what the Supreme Court has said? What kind of games are they trying to play?
Well, that's a great question. One I wish I knew the answer to, and I don't. All we can tell is that there seems to be, from state officials, whether it's through the Agency of Education or the Vermont Principals Association, there seems to be some disdain for Mid-Vermont Christian and other religious schools, the beliefs they profess and how they want to operate their schools. And so they again essentially blacklisted them from town tuitioning and from athletics, and that's something that certainly is not permissible by the Constitution.
Now, I'm assuming on that point, that ADF has, before we sued the State Department of Education in Vermont, you sent a letter and explained, literally laid out the facts in the case. They just disregarded that, or how did they respond?
You're exactly right. So, again, let me back up a little bit. What the state is asking Mid-Vermont Christian to do is agree that it won't operate its school in line with its religious beliefs. So what does that mean? Well, the school, again, believes men are men and girls are girls, so it separates restrooms along with that belief. It separates its sports teams based on that belief. It, of course, uses a dress code, pronouns, so on and so forth. And the state says, if you want to receive town tuitioning money, you have to agree not to do those things. Of course, the school can't do that. It's a Christian school, and the whole reason it exists is, to inculcate its Christian values in its students. And the school said that to the state. It laid it out, put it on paper, and essentially asked for an exemption from these rules, from these non-discrimination rules. And the state declined to grant an exemption and then reduced Mid-Vermont's status from an approved independent school, which meant it could receive money, and reduced that status to what's called a recognized independent school, which means the school cannot receive money. So it's not like this was sprung on the state. It knew well in advance what the school was asking for, yet declined to accommodate those religious beliefs.
Now, you filed suit?
That's right. Yep. Okay. Filed suit
and then,
about 10 days ago.
And then who is it that's defending the suit? Is it the Attorney General?
Well, that's to be determined. Okay. We have to serve the state and go through the procedural rigmaroles. But, yes, it most likely will be the Attorney General's office, at least defending the State Agency of Education and Board of Education.
Okay.
Now, there's some local school districts that are named defendants because they're the ones who actually recouped the tuition payments, if you will. So, we'll see who they retain.
Okay.
So the suit requires some kind of financial compensation when you do win.
We have requested damages. That's correct.
All right.
So,
sorry, I'm not a lawyer on this on this show. I'm not the lawyer, so I don't know all the legal language. But
that's why she asked the best questions.
I appreciate your clarifying damages. That's the word I was looking for.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and so then the sports team is prohibited from engaging in intercollegiate or I guess the sports leagues, whatever they have there. Because it will not play against a female team that has male members.
That's right. The school, because it believes, again, boys are boys and girls are girls, it's not going to do anything that facilitates the opposing view.
Okay.
And so, mind you, let's go back to February. This was girls basketball. And I should also note that the that the sports league, the Vermont Principals Association, their own policy says that boys shall not be permitted to compete in girls' athletics. There's a policy that says that. So this was not as though the school pulled this out of thin air. The Vermont Principals Association own policy said that. And so when it was asked to compete against a biological male within girls' basketball, that's important because, again, the school's position is it's not going to facilitate something that gives the appearance that boys can be girls or vice versa. That's because, obviously, it doesn't believe that. So it forfeited that game. So it took the loss. Mind you, this was the state tournament. And rather than that being enough punishment for the school, the league came back and expelled the school from all sports. So not just girls basketball. The school can no longer participate in anything: baseball, track, volleyball, nothing. It's been expelled, and so it's been forced to travel out of state to play other Christian schools, which of course there's time and expense with that, and
well, it cuts down on scholarship opportunities too. That's right. So there's we could go through a list of the detriments that has caused the school because of declining to facilitate something it doesn't believe. Wow. Okay. So how much of this is going on around the country?
Well, as we kind of talked about the public benefits, the tuitioning angle, that's nothing new. That's been going on, continues to happen as we see here in Vermont. With the sports angle, it's kind of something new. Now, biological males wanting to play in girls' sports, that's not new. We see that on the news all the time. But what is new and what I see the trend kind of going in this direction is, high school sports leagues or state-sponsored sports leagues now telling Christian schools that they have to do certain things if they want to continue to participate. That's what happened here in Vermont, and I can see the trend moving in that direction across the state. As far as I know, this is the first sort of lawsuit where you have a private Christian school saying we don't want to do that. We don't want to facilitate falsities. But certainly, I believe there will be more to come.
Well, very good on you to begin that process because I think it's necessary. We got to have some precedent for our students. That's
right. And ADF
Absolutely.
does a good job with these cases. So how can people follow these cases, and what is your website? And if people need more information or have their own problem that they want to discuss with ADF, how do they get a hold of you?
Absolutely. ADFlegal.org. You can go there. You can track all of our cases, including this. It's Mid-Vermont Christian School. You can also track our other cases, our women's sports cases, so on and so forth. And we also have a link there on our website where if you're in need of legal assistance, you can click that and submit a form, which will shoot it over to us.
And if you have an abundance of funds left over, there's a link there someplace where you can donate to ADF, and it's a good place to put your money because of what they're doing. All these things, we've mentioned this before in the program, all these things cost money, and somebody's got to pay for it. And your clients are not, because ADF does what you're doing pro bono.
It's all pro bono, all for free. That's right.
Yeah, but it has to come from the generosity of others, and that's where you can help out if you would.
Absolutely.
All right. Jake, thank you for joining us today. We certainly appreciate it. We know you've got another interview or something coming up, and we got to let you go for that, but we certainly appreciate your time, and we will follow up with this and see how it plays out in the future here.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Jacob
you.
Reed, who is a legal counsel for the Center for Christian Ministries at the Alliance Defending Freedom. And Gina and I will be right back after these messages. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And we're back. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And we had today, again, another informative, I want to try and use a different word rather than just interesting over time, an informative show about some of the things that are going on, especially with DEI and this terrible case in Vermont.
I can't imagine that this case in Vermont could go very far, especially given the recent Supreme Court ruling in favor of the school in Maine.
Apparently, the educators in Vermont can't read what the Supreme Court has written because if they did, they wouldn't have gotten themselves in.
I think we reported even that after the Supreme Court ruling, Maine came in at a different angle, trying to do exactly the same thing that the courts told them you cannot do.
Here's the problem for Vermont.
You're in the United States of America.
Here's the problem for Vermont. They're going to have to pay legal fees to the ADF, and this.
Not only that, but damages to the families,
and the students and all this. This could cost them a lot of money, and I will tell you, the legal fees that they will be entitled to will be enormous. Now,
do you know what the saddest part about that is? That the Department of Education that they're suing does not care. It's not their money. There's no punishment or consequences for the individuals who made these decisions. The taxpayers are ultimate. In fact, the people suing are paying for them to be sued. So it's just a horrible situation, I think.
But that's what happens in the big city, I guess. A couple of things in the international scene that you brought up. One was Cardinal Burke.
Yes, we were talking about the actions against Cardinal Burke. Although, I have to tell you, this seems like a PR trick because Cardinal Burke's office wasn't, from news reports, he says he wasn't notified yet by the Vatican that his housing in Rome has been taken away from him.
Yeah, he had free housing there, I guess.
Yeah, given to him by, I think, Pope Benedict had opened up that office to him. And he's such a, from what I know and understand of him, very humble. This isn't really a punishment, I wouldn't think, to him, or he wouldn't see it that way, from what I know of him. And the fact that it's in the press before he's even notified makes me very suspect about what the Vatican is actually up to. Yeah,
it is a shame. But
especially on the tails of Bishop Strickland's announcement by the
Bishop Strickland, if he's smart, will find a little congregation someplace, a group of nuns or something that he can minister to, and sit down and write a book.
Yeah, that would be a good book.
And it will be a bestseller.
He's a good and holy man, for sure.
He is. So
both of them.
We pray for them. If he turns his attention to doing that, I think he will benefit a lot of people.
Speaking of good and holy men, we lost a good one this week.
Monsignor Frank Chido.
That's here in Des Moines.
I was fortunate enough to be with him part of the day just before he died.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I had been stopping in to see him once a week with the communion, and I wasn't the only one, of course, but his family was there, and it was sad because you knew the end was coming. And so Monday we have his funeral, and it's going to be ironic for me because I always thought that the Chido would be presiding at my funeral someday, and I know he meant a lot to me. When the arrows were flying in my direction, it was Monsignor Chido that stepped in and defended me. And when there were those that wanted to marginalize me, it was Monsignor Chido that offered me a spot with the Latin Mass.
He was your advocate, yes.
Right. And he was a good advocate for me. And I served at the Latin Mass, doing the Latin Mass over at St. Anthony's until I had my stroke 2 years ago, and then I couldn't get over there all the time. But picked it back up when it moved to
when Father Chido got sick, and we adopted it at our parish, St. Augustine.
Right. So Monsignor Chido meant a lot to me, and he certainly helped me out quite a bit. And when I had my stroke, speaking of my stroke, he was one of the first people that came up to see me in the hospital.
He served his community.
He did.
I mean, he all of his communities. I think wasn't he at St. John's for a while?
He was all over.
Central Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he was certainly very well appreciated, and he was a very dynamic preacher.
Yes.
Very good. And you're right. He served his people very well, and we will miss him. So keep Father or Monsignor Chido in your prayers. Yes.
Yeah, pray for him.
Yes, because
rest in peace.
Yes. Yeah, all right.
And do we have a couple minutes?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd love to mention something real quick. I do follow. We've had Kyle Seraphin. He's a suspended FBI whistleblower on our program a number of times. Our listeners may remember that Kyle is the one who notified Congress about the FBI investigating traditional Catholics, speaking of the Latin Mass.
Yeah, and he's been on twice.
We've had him on the show, right, and to talk about these things. And I was listening to his show yesterday, and he was interviewing a couple of whistleblowers from, I want to say, the Department of Homeland Security, who have identified our government's child trafficking of the illegal immigrant children who unaccompanied over the border. They were on the show because they were telling the listeners about the ruling that administrative rule that the department is invocating here, and they are hoping that they can get enough public comments to get this rule annihilated, because if it takes effect, the child trafficking by our government will become even easier. So I just want to tell people to go to a website. They've put in, 100 or so comments that you can just literally cut and paste, and a link that you can put the comments in. They're hoping to get 50,000 to get this rule eliminated. So the website is Truth Trench, TRUTHTRENCH.org/defend the children. And you can cut and paste as many of them as you want. You can even enter them anonymously if you don't want to put in your name. So again, that's truthtrench.org/defend the children.
We will encourage our listeners to do that.
I appreciate it.
Because we know when one of those things, when they open a rule for comments, a lot of times, the agency is going to do what it wants to do regardless of the comments. But when those rules are challenged in court, the court will look at those comments to see whether they were considered or really considered or not. So it's important to get those comments.
And if you're interested in this topic at all, these two whistleblowers that Kyle interviewed, it's on Rumble. It's about an hour long. You will be mortified. I'm warning you ahead of time. But it's Kyle Seraphin, Seraphin, on Rumble, and it was yesterday's episode. I shouldn't say that. It was on November 29th's episode.
A good man and a devout Catholic.
Yes, yes. As many of these suspendables are, they're just wonderful people.
And unfortunately, we are out of time, so let's end with our Defender's Prayer. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls.
Amen.
Amen. And that's it for this week. Don't forget our annual dinner this Friday on the December 8th. It's at the Embassy Suites downtown. Dr. David Anders of EWTN's Call to Communion will be our featured speaker, and you can get tickets by contacting us here at the studio at iowacatholicradio.com. That's it. We will see you next time, and until then, don't forget to go to church and take your kids.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. Faith on Trial, with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano. Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, iowacatholicradio.com, and the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.